It's said that intuition is always correct. I simply never imagined that mine would take me directly into the type of nightmare that individuals share on Reddit in the hopes that someone would reassure them that they are not insane. I sensed something was wrong for months. First, small things. My 7-year wife, Maya, began to behave differently. She always texted and smiled at her phone, leaving for work earlier than normal and returning home later. She would simply laugh, dismiss it, and tell me I was dreaming when I asked. She would casually wave her hand and remark, "It's just work," as if I were a toddler inquiring as to why the sky was blue. It wasn't just work, though. Next began the journey. She began discussing it weeks ago, and each time she brought it up, she fidgeted. She had forced a smile as she said, "Just a girl's trip," but her eyes had left it too soon. And now she was packed in our bedroom. As I watched her from the doorway, my heart pounded in my chest like a rhythm. I could hear the rustle of fabric and the zippers, and every sound made me feel more anxious. "Are you truly required to leave?" My voice was weaker than I had intended when I eventually asked. I didn't want to come out as domineering. I had no intention of provoking another dispute, but I couldn't stand the weight in my gut. She continued folding her clothing perfectly without even looking at me, as if she had practiced this exchange 100 times. "We've discussed this, Liam," she remarked in a calm, unattached tone. "I have to go for a bit." A week? It felt dry in my throat. "This is the most unusual journey you've ever taken." "Not without me." At last, Maya turned, and I noticed how she gazed at me. Not with affection, not even with irritation, simply apathy. She groaned and rolled her eyes, saying, "Oh, Liam, I'm a self-sufficient woman. I can go out with my buddies without your consent. I am not something to be owned." I didn't want to admit how much that hurt. I pushed down the lump in my throat with a forceful swallow. I murmured, "Okay," taking a step back to give her room. "Just watch out, okay?" Her attention was already back on her suitcase, and she hardly acknowledged me. I made an effort to tell myself that I was overanalyzing. It was merely paranoia, that I wasn't witnessing my marriage fall apart. Then I noticed it. Something that turned my blood to ice was tucked between folded jeans and blouses among the neatly packed clothing. A short, tight, scandalous police officer costume, complete with handcuffs and a shiny badge. It's not exactly what you would bring on a girl's trip. My heart struck my ribs hard. "Maya, what the devil?" My voice was harsh, tinged with incredulity and, darker, anger. She stopped, for a moment only. Then she smirked as she slowly picked up the clothing. "It's just for fun," she said in a light-hearted, playful tone. "I'm organizing a small party with the girls." My fingers curled into fists as heat crawled up my neck. "You think I'll believe that?" My voice was low and shaky from something hazardous. "That this," I pointed to the ensemble, "is for a night out with the girls?" Her eyes gleamed with something almost smug as she inclined her head. She tossed the disguise back into her bag and added, "Believe whatever you want. It isn't that important." At that point, she took action. Like a cat teasing its food, she reached into the closet, took out a rubber band, and stretched it between her fingers. Then she smiled. "Oh, and he's already waiting for me outside," she replied in a horribly sweet voice. The world stopped, I promise. I had been correct all along, despite every unease, nagging suspicion, and restless night. And I was crushed under the weight of that fact. Something broke inside of me. My pulse was pounding in my ears as I turned and sprinted out of the bedroom. My body went through the front door, down the stairs, automatically, and there he was. He appeared as at ease, as if he were waiting for an Uber while leaning against a glossy black automobile and holding a cigarette to his lips. I was on him before he could even react. He began, "Hey, you!" But I caught him by the collar and gave him such a violent yank that the cigarette flew out of his lips. "What the?" As I yanked him forward and shoved him in the direction of the house, his words trailed off. Behind me, Maya's voice boomed. "Liam, quit!" I didn't stop, though. I pulled the jerk inside, my thoughts a haze of blazing rage, my grip like iron. Before he could respond, I flung him onto the floor of the living room as the door crashed behind us. With a look of panic on her face, Maya hurried down the steps. "Liam, What are you doing, my God? I wasn't listening, though. The anger was too overwhelming and all-consuming. I forced him to the ground, my fists making contact with his flesh as each hit released months of repressed treachery. He struggled beneath me, breathless, feeble. But he tried to fight back, he really did. Maya screamed and tried to pull me away by grabbing at my shoulders. Stop, Liam, please! I pushed her away. My vision was tunneled, and my breathing was labored. I growled, holding onto his shirt. Do you honestly think you can just come into my house, screw my wife, and go? His eyes became wide with fear. I had no idea silence. He crumpled as I struck him again. The room was filled with Maya's sobs. You'll kill him, Liam. As I gazed down at his bleeding face, the fight had been sapped from him, and my chest heaved. It didn't bring any satisfaction. Just nothing. I looked across at Maya. Her eyes flickered with terror as she drew back. Do you believe you have control? I said in a low, risky voice. She took a deep breath. Please, Liam, let's just talk, I chuckled. A hollow, icy laugh. I whispered, Oh, I won't regret this. I took hold of her wrist and pulled her in the direction of the bedroom. On the bed, her luggage was open. I grabbed the outfit and shoved it into her trembling hands. Don it. Maya gasped for air. Are you crazy? I clenched my fingers. Put. It. Continue. Her cheeks were wet with tears. She followed my instructions with trembling hands, her motions rigid and robotic. I took a step back when she was finally dressed. Now, I continued in an emotionless voice, go sit with your lover. Hold off till the police arrive. Her gaze expanded. The police? I grabbed the phone and punched the dial. Yes, I calmly said. I want to report a disturbance. Here are my wife and her lover. I believe this is something you should see, Maya cried. Please, Liam, don't. I turned away and picked up my already packed suitcase. This was going to happen. I hesitated at the doorway. Maya, I'm taking everything. The home, the cash, everything. I heard her fall on the ground as I went outside. The air was filled with sirens. I didn't turn around. I felt free for the first time in months. Despite the sirens blaring behind me, I continued on. I didn't even reduce my speed. My heart pounded like a war drum, and my knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Neon lights streaked over the wet pavement as the city slid by me. I had only one unwavering certainty, no plan, no destination. I had no intention of returning. I could still hear Maya's sobs, a ghost of a life that had been irreparably broken. And I thought of that man, her lover, his bloody, broken face. Yet I felt nothing. No regrets, no guilt, just a gnawing, lonely emptiness. I spent hours behind the wheel. The excitement began to wear off, leaving behind an odd numbness. I was at a petrol station on the outskirts of town at one point, looking at my image in the car's side mirror. My eyes were sunken and dark, and my face looked pale. I was stared back at by a stranger. It was this. My life was split into a before and an after at this point. I entered the convenience store, took out a burner phone, a cheap prepaid card, a bottle of whiskey, and a pack of smokes, despite the fact that I didn't smoke. As he rang everything up, the cashier hardly gave me a glance. I got back in the car, opened the trunk, and took out my duffel bag, which I had packed weeks prior when I first started to get bad instincts. Everything the first needed was there, including my passport and large amounts of cash. This was what I had anticipated. I simply never thought I would follow through. An airline ticket. The next step was that. I took out my old phone and browsed through the flights, the one that was still linked to Maya and my previous existence. Hawaii, Mexico, Thailand. A place where I could vanish, somewhere far with an ocean. Then I did something foolish before I could talk myself out of it. Something careless. I launched the app for our bank. Already, the joint account was frozen. Maya must have responded quickly. However, my own, which she never had access to, remained unaltered. Sitting there like an exit sign is $50,000. I moved everything to an offshore account I had opened several months prior. There. I was untouchable now. As I gazed at Maya's name on the screen, I took a final breath. I then hurled the phone out the window after turning it off. It broke cleanly as it hit the asphalt. It was time to go. By the time I arrived at the airport, the skyline was blazing with gold and orange as the sun rose. Despite the chaos I had left behind, the city appeared serene. After parking in the long-term spot, I picked up my bag and entered. The airport was crowded, with passengers mumbling as they passed security, gripping coffee, and drowsily dragging their bags. I approached the counter and slid my passport through. "One way," I said in a firm voice. "The first flight departs." After giving me a quick blink, the attendant nodded while tapping on her keyboard. After a pause, she said, "Thailand. Leaves in 40 minutes. Excellent." Without asking any questions, she gave me the ticket. The burden on my chest started to lessen as I walked to the gate. It was this: no more Maya, no more treachery, no more acting like you're someone you're not. The past has vanished, and I felt as if I could breathe for the first time in months, if not years. The warm, salty island air slammed into me like a lullaby. I knew I had made the proper decision as soon as I got off the plane. Thailand was a wonderland. I discovered a modest, although adequate, villa near the coast. A kitchen, a balcony with a view of the sea, and a bed. It was sufficient. I woke up to the sound of waves every morning. Every night, I allowed the ocean to wash away the memories that were still attached to me. I wasn't lonely, but I was alone. I went through rainforests, swam, and ate food that made me feel alive even though it burned my mouth. The locals didn't inquire or bother. They took me for what I was, just another immigrant seeking refuge. But there are shadows even in paradise, and my followed me around. Even if I could act as I pleased, there were still evenings when I woke up gasping for air and could not stop hearing Maya's voice. She cries. The wide-eyed, scared way she gazed at me in that final instant. I considered going to the news, checking to see if the headlines included my name. However, I never did. The past was the past. That's what I told myself, anyway. All of that changed on a muggy evening 6 months later. A familiar voice cut through the silence while I was drinking whiskey at a bar by the beach and gazing out at the waves. "Liam?" My heart slammed against my ribs as I turned too quickly, and there stood someone I never expected to see again, standing in the faint light of the lanterns. Leo, my oldest pal. He appeared older, perhaps. Or perhaps it was me who had changed. Without asking, he took up a chair, got a beer, and then just regarded me. "Jesus." He lowered his voice. "You did indeed run, did you not?" I didn't respond. He blew out his breath slowly and combed his hair. "Are you even aware of what transpired following your departure?" I remained silent. Leo spoke quietly as he leaned closer. "She lost everything." A weird shiver went up my back. "What are you saying?" At last, I pushed out. He gave a head shake. "That evening, the police arrived. When they found her, she was still wearing that fucking costume. Man, you embarrassed her." Rumors began to circulate as news broke. She lost her flat and her job. Her parents refused to speak to her at all. Gazing at the condensation on my glass, I forcefully gulped. He said, "She's staying with her sister now, attempting to reassemble the parts." I ought to have been content. I ought to have felt validated. But I only experienced emptiness. Leo sighed after observing me for a while. "Were you ever in love with her?" His voice was quieter as he inquired. I chuckled, but my voice was broken. "Yes," I muttered. "Yes, I did." Leo gave a nod. "Then perhaps it's time to return home." I didn't answer. I knew in my heart that he was correct. However, confronting the past meant confronting the person I had grown into. Furthermore, I wasn't sure if I was prepared for that. That night, I didn't get any sleep. I just sat there and stared at the black waves breaking on the coast after Leo left the bar. Although the whiskey burned in my throat, it did not provide the necessary warmth or numbness. Maya lost everything. The weight of the words pressed against my ribs as they rattled in my mind like loose gunshots. I had desired for her to endure pain, to experience the same heartbreaking betrayal that she had inflicted upon me. She also did. However, after hearing it expressed, I wasn't sure if this was a win or just another injury I would have to bear. Was it fair to her? "Yes," a voice whispered deep within me. "But was that really the point?" inquired another voice. one that was softer and more worn out. I had made up my mind by dawn. I was returning. One of those languid, syrupy dreams where you know something horrible is coming, but are unable to wake up. The flight home felt like a dream. It seemed unreal to me to be returning to a world that had already moved on without me, as evidenced by every airport announcement, every flash of city lights below me, and every stranger's voice. Perhaps it had. I strolled through the terminal with my head down. No television cameras displaying my name on the screen. No police officers waiting for me. The sound of a city I used to call home. I went directly to a motel on the outskirts of town in a taxi, inexpensive and unidentified. I wasn't prepared to return to the ghosts I had left behind, and the places I knew. On the first day, I drove. Past my former home, which Maya and I co-constructed. Now it was deserted. A for sale sign dangling languidly in the wind, unkempt grass, and dark windows. Like everything we had, it appeared deserted. I ought to have sensed something: sadness, regret, and nostalgia. However, I only experienced a sense of remoteness, as if I were viewing someone else's life. After that, I drove by the locations that had once held significance. Our first date was at the diner, the park where we used to lie in the grass on Sundays and dream about a future that would never come. Nothing had changed in the city. However, I had. I parked outside Maya's sister's house on the third day. It was a tiny, unassuming space, far from the slick, contemporary condo Maya used to boast about. Warm sunshine streamed through the windows, and laughter filtered through the gaps. I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel for a long time. Then I knocked before I could talk myself out of it. The door opened. There she was, Maya. She had a new appearance, neither worse nor better. Simply put, distinctive. She appeared to have eaten less because her face was leaner. Her eyes, which had once been piercing and defiant, now held something else: weariness and fragility. We stood there staring for a long time. She stepped away after swallowing. "Enter now," she spoke quietly. Not icy, not furious, simply resigned. I entered. The scent of the house was one of comfortable flowers and fresh coffee. There was warmth in it, but it felt little in comparison to the life we had before. Life. In the little living room, we were seated opposite one another. With her fingers clutching the hem of her sweater, she said, "I didn't think I'd see you again." My voice was hoarse, like if I hadn't spoken in days, and I said, "I wasn't sure I'd come back." As if anticipating that response, she nodded. We were silent for a long time, not tense, not weird, simply put, weighty. Then, at last, I spoke. The thing that had been bothering me ever since I turned to leave. "I am aware that I ruined you." She winced. "Only a bit." She didn't turn away, though. I went on. "I hurt you. I made you seem bad. I left you with nothing." "It was what you deserved," I told myself. Maya took a deep breath and blinked quickly, but she didn't say anything. I stared at the floor while leaning forward and resting my elbows on my knees. "And perhaps it was," I acknowledged. "Perhaps you were entitled to that level of suffering." Her breath caught. At last, I looked her in the eye. "But I still regret it despite that." A shudder ran through her as her lips parted. "Liam," I said, "I hated you for a long time. I hate the thing you did to me. What you made me into. I also believed that I would feel liberated after I departed." I let out a slow breath, hoping that I would be able to move on. However, I didn't. Since I carried that rage with me. Maya's eyes were sparkling as she put a palm to her mouth. "I'm at a loss for words," I said. "Then don't say anything. Just pay attention." She gave a nod. With trepidation, I inhaled. I said, "I don't forgive you. I also don't expect you to pardon me." Maya's face fell flat. She muttered, "I never needed your forgiveness. I simply wanted to let you know that I'm sorry. Sincere apologies." I gave a nod. "I understand." One more quiet. Her fingers barely touched mine as she tentatively reached across the table. A decision. I could go away. I could go away and never return. Or I could wait. Only for a second. I took her hand. She let out a quivering breath, gripping my fingers. "What now?" she whispered. I didn't have an answer, but for the first time, that felt okay. Holding her hand felt like clutching a ghost, something familiar, something warm, but not quite real. Maya's fingers trembled in mine, but she didn't let go. I should have pulled away, should have let the past stay where it belonged. But in that moment, it felt like we were standing at the edge of something fragile, something none of us knew how to name. A second chance? A farewell? I had no idea. Perhaps that was acceptable. We conversed. Not in relation to the affair. Not about that night when everything broke down. It's not about the money, the house, or the police. The wounds were too raw and too deep. We discussed the quiet topics instead: the climate, her mug of coffee, the stray feline that had begun to loiter on her sister's porch. Even if it wasn't much, it was something. Maya eventually leaned back and covered her hands with the sleeves of her sweater. She said, "I thought I'd never see you again, and I persuaded myself everything was all right. That I was worthy of it." I said nothing. She took a slow, hesitant breath. "However, I was unsure of how to react when I learned that you had returned. I wasn't sure if I wanted to see you at all." I understood it more than I cared to acknowledge, so I nodded. She gave a quiet laugh, but it wasn't a joyful one. "Liam, you ruined me." I took a deep breath. She paused and looked down in her lap before saying, "But I first ruined us." The words were heavy and unavoidable as they hovered between us. We sat amid the ruins of who we had been, in the muck of that fact. I stayed in a motel once again that night. I felt the weight of every choice I had ever made as I lay on the rigid mattress and gazed at the cracked ceiling. I could still see Maya's expression when she told me that I had wrecked us first, and I could still hear her voice. She was correct. Her treachery had ripped us apart. But in my rage, I had set everything on fire. Neither of us had emerged unscathed from this. The worst part might have been that, in this tale, I wasn't the hero. Furthermore, she wasn't the bad guy. We were really two shattered individuals who had ruined one another in various ways. The following day, I was back at her door. I didn't intend to do that. Like they had a consciousness of their own, my feet simply led me there. Maya seemed surprised, but not upset to see me as she opened the door. She said, "I didn't think you'd come back," and moved aside. "Neither did I muttered as I entered. We sat at the kitchen table, the air heavy with unspoken things, while she made us coffee. At last, I broke the stillness. "Maya, what do you want from me?" She ran her fingers over the rim of her mug and gazed down. "I'm not sure," she said. Since I was also in the dark, I nodded. After a lengthy silence, I remarked, "I don't think we can fix this. I don't believe we are destined to." Her hands clenched around her cup as she swallowed forcefully. I went on to say, "But perhaps we don't have to hate each other forever." Something delicate, almost hopeful, was in her eyes as they flickered up to mine. "Perhaps," she muttered. Over the course of the following few weeks, we learned how to coexist in the same area without disintegrating. It wasn't simple. At times, the past threatened to drag us under as it battled its way to the surface. On certain nights, I would wake up thinking about how she had smiled at her phone, how she had packed her luggage, as if she weren't breaking my heart with each folded garment, and how she had glanced at that man. I was also aware that Maya had her own ghosts, the way I had made her feel inferior, the way I had abandoned her in that house, broken and alone, with only the sirens to distract her. In different ways, we carried our scars. However, we weren't utilizing them as weapons for the first time. One evening, Maya and I sat on her sister's balcony and watched the sky change to pink and orange hues as the sun sank below the horizon. With hesitation, she turned to face me. "Do you believe that things will ever be all right again?" I took a while to respond. I had lost all understanding of what okay actually meant. However, I was aware of this. I had lost my anger. Perhaps that was sufficient. The past weighs a lot. When you believe you've finally outrun it, it whispers in the still moments, clings to your skin, and settles in your bones. Attempting to cobble together something that no longer existed, Maya and I circled each other like ghosts for weeks. There were no heartfelt regrets, no frantic admissions, and no pledges to put things right. Because it was impossible to make certain things right. There were some things that were only acceptable. The wooden planks creaked beneath us as we sat on her sister's porch once more one evening. The fragrance of rain permeated the air, and we could hardly hear the distant hum of traffic. Maya inhaled deeply and exhaled slowly. She acknowledged, I can't stop thinking about what might have been. If I had chosen differently, if you had, I said nothing, because I had also considered that. We saved each other in every way we could have saved ourselves, the little things that might have gone differently. However, that is not how life operates. No rewind button is present, no second draft. Just what is. With a scratchy voice, I eventually answered, I don't hate you. Maya turned and looked into my eyes. I also don't hate you. We were silent for a long time, both of us saying things we would never speak. Then she muttered, I think we need to let go. Quietly. I nodded, though my throat constricted. Since she was correct. For so long, our hurt, our faults, and our fury had defined who we were. It had become a comfort, a habit to hold on to. However, the time had come. It's time to release one another. I packed my stuff for the following day. Maya watched me from the doorway, her arms encircling her body. I said, I'm not sure where I'm going yet. She smiled at me a little, dejectedly. It's all right. For a minute, neither of us knew what to say, so we just stood there. Then she came forward and put her arms around me without saying anything. It wasn't an embracing of desperation. It was not an entreaty to remain. It was simply farewell. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears as she withdrew, yet she was grinning. Liam, look after yourself. I took a deep breath. You as well. And then, I simply turned and left. I have no idea where the path will lead me. Perhaps a different nation or city. Perhaps I'll locate a peaceful spot by the sea and allow the waves to wash away what's left of the person I was. This is all I know. I no longer run, and I feel light for the first time in a long time. A sense of possibilities despite being empty, as if, just perhaps, this is the beginning of something new.